Microlending has the power to change lives, but alone it's not enough to end poverty. Cottage Industries are the next step toward empowering the poor to raise themselves out of poverty. Join us as we visit a handful of these small businesses and examine them up close. Today on Big Questions. I'm Kim Clark.
And I'm Pat Werheim.
We go out into the world to look at everything.
Topics such as food deserts, wage theft, and recidivism in jails.
Access to healthcare, education, welfare, major issues we face at home and around the world today.
Come search with us for answers to these issues and more
as we discovered new answers to today's big questions. While there are many approaches to alleviating poverty, few are as sustainable, practical, and efficient as microlending and cottage industries.
Cottage industries are a form of miniature industry. They hire and train local labor. They provide living wages and support a number of families. These are extremely important, particularly in a very poor country like Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a relatively new country, founded in 1971 when it split off from Pakistan. It is a country of about 150 million people in a space about the size of Iowa. And as you know, every year the Bay of Bengal floods and floods up to a quarter or a third of the country.
What does the flooding of 25% of the country have on the country every year?
It is a terrible effect because people have to move to high ground.
Yeah.
Their farms are wiped out if they have any farms, any agriculture. Sometimes their animals drown.
Yeah.
Actually, sometimes if it's a really bad flood, then people drown. One year, thousands of people drowned because of the flood. They just couldn't move out of the way soon enough. So it's a terrible, terrible economic toll on the country that happens every single year. However, in Bangladesh, the number of poor people declined 26% between 2000 and 2010, from nearly 63 million people to 49 million people.
The people harvesting this pond used to live in extreme poverty. They had no home or steady income. With this settlement project, they have a permanent home, and they support themselves by harvesting fish, which also provides a steady source of protein in their diets and helps families recover from malnutrition.
One thing stood out above all, and it's this amazing fishery project, and it's acres and acres of what was an off-season project that the men took up to dig what would be a fishing hole here.
A group of families manages and regularly combs the pond with a net, keeping some of the mature fish while moving many of them into a larger pond for further cultivation. This community produces about 16.2 tons of fish each year.
They planted little minnows in the
Right. They
PSDI helped them plant the minnows.
exactly. The fingerlings were about like that. They don't swim up and down; they swim sideways.
Yes.
They got to about a year, and they had to get more room because they had really taken up that space. The folks doing this are really, they cleverly mapped out how big a fish could grow in 1 year, and they knew that they had a schedule to keep digging, because if they didn't keep digging, the fish would take up the space they had and eat each other if they didn't have enough room. So next door, they dug a pond the next year, and it filled up with water during the wet season as everything floods, and it flooded, and they moved those guys to the next pond over, and again with the fingerlings, and they ended up with 3 progressively larger pools. So when the smaller pond had, I think, 50 families around it.
Fisheries make rapid progress after their inception and exemplify a cornerstone of PSDI's approach, the creation of income generation. With a project that is sustainable both in profitability and food generation, the families that maintain it do not require continual assistance. This fisheries community also includes a child development center, a clinic, and other profit-generating cottage industries.
The Partners for Sustainable Development International, or PSDI, is a small American-based non-government organization that has been in Bangladesh for almost 30 years. It is often identified with microlending, which is true, but it does more than that. Its model is to work with the very, very poorest of the poor, people who scarcely have a meal a day, often don't have a roof on their heads, and are so poor they can't even imagine getting a microloan for, say, $25. They're also so poor they don't send their children to the free government public school. It is just too much work. PSDI works with those families, first by providing them 2 meals a day and a roof on their heads, and then it gets started with microlending. And out of microlending, then people, usually women, learn that they can manage money and actually make money and support their families. Out of that comes the model of cottage industries. So they organize villagers to be in various cottage industries, and then they support many, many families through these industries.
So the World Bank sets the poverty line at $1.25 a day, and they were talking about people who live really below, at or below that level. What is life like for folks that live, with children and a family and at that level?
Well, the $1.25, of course, is using the US dollars to measure that, and there's some controversy about that because there are some communities that simply work on trade and not on money at all, but that's another issue. But in Bangladesh, under $1.25 a day means that you probably have 1 meal a day if you're very, very lucky. You don't send your children to school. You just scrape around and see what you can literally beg, sometimes borrow, and of course once in a while steal for your family. And it is a life that is so unimaginably poor that one can't imagine that people can even survive at all.
PSDI creates rural industrial opportunities such as silk processing, embroidery, and water pumps, as well as the manufacturing of household goods such as mosquito nets, mattresses, soaps, quilts, and chalk. They hire and train only from target families, creating a skilled labor force and allowing goods to be produced domestically.
These families are brought from Kutibari village. The village has a village with extreme poor people.
Yes.
They almost all are extreme hardcore poor, and they had to live many people within a small place.
Yeah.
So brother thought how they can be resettled in a better place.
আমি আসলাম যে এখানে ব্রাদার সাথে একটু সাক্ষাৎ করা। আমাদের এখন আমরা টার্গেট পরিবার ছিল।
যখন টার্গেট ফ্যামিলি ছিল তখন কোন ক্যাটাগরিতে ছিল জানেন?
এই যে চলো
Hardcore.
And how long did your family graduate?
এখন গ্রাজুয়েট।
কত সালে?
When we went through and met so many of these wonderful people, we interacted with folks called social workers. Social worker in Bangladesh is very, very different than what we see here in America as a social worker.
Those social workers in Bangladesh work with the whole family and try to bring them out of poverty. They also monitor the loans. They come in every 2 weeks, and every 2 weeks you'll see the women sitting on their haunches, counting their money, paying back their loan bits at a time. And they monitor that. They also help people for example, if your goat isn't producing milk, they help you with that. If your farm isn't doing well, your fishery isn't getting enough fish, they help you really achieve at least some modicum of economic well-being. So that is their job, not just merely helping people, but helping people out of poverty.
Right.
And Hakeem himself is an example of what the people PSDI hires.
Right.
They take people who have been in abject poverty and have worked their way out, and then they often hire those people for social workers because, of course, they understand best what it's like to live in extreme, extreme poverty.
He was what he calls a nobody, and he worked himself up and up and up and up the food chain to become someone of great, pride. I mean, he loves this job. Doesn't like
It's a
this
great
job.
job.
Loves this job. Would do anything for this job.
These women raise silkworms and process the cocoons into thread, which they then dye before winding onto spools. From there, they can be sold or processed further on looms or sold as fabric.
I've seen them weave the thread
Oh, it's incredible weaving.
and embroider it.
Yes.
And then, of course, this is a chain thing.
Right.
They sell this. They sell
Absolutely.
these in stores. They make clothes, and sometimes they just sell the fabric.
And they have their own
Stores.
retail outlet.
Yes,
so
retail
they're,
outlet.
they're
So you've got a whole chain of operations.
Right.
there, and they
Nothing goes
provide so many jobs through that chain.
Yes.
Yes.
Garments factory is 4 sector. One is swing. One is stitching, hand stitching. One is hand printing. 3, one is mosquitoes net. And what are things? Beds.
Oh,
Foam, mattress, yes.
Yes.
One is mattress and mosquitoes net.
Yes.
The 4 sector. I have
Part of it is batik,
part
the
of
printing batik.
batik.
Yeah.
Yes, batik, but not batik. Block.
Oh, block. Okay.
My sector is block, hand stitching, and swing, and mattress and mosquitoes net. 4 sector.
And how many people in the factory? About.
About 300. About all
Yes.
is near about 300.
And
And not my sector is one here.
yes.
Others side.
The garments and embroidery produced in this factory include dozens of various clothing and bedding items such as shirts, pants, saris, and bed sheets. For many, this will be their first opportunity for a job outside of the house, and usually their only opportunity to make use of their talents. PSDI maintains several outlets and retail stores, from which the profits are then passed back to the development partners.
So PSDI puts women in the role of the household manager. That's
right.
Really.
And the household breadwinner.
Right.
And in the beginning, of course, all micro lenders were worried that the men would get really upset about
Right.
this. But then they discovered their wives are very good at making money, and so they begin not to mind about this. It's really been astonishing because when they first began microlending, they were really worried because most of the microloans, as you know, go to women because they pay back. Most of these women are married, which means in the Muslim religion, they're behind purdah.
Purdah is something, it's a word we've never heard of.
Purdah
really.
means after you're married, you're supposed to always wear a veil when you go out in public. That's why you see in many Muslim countries women who are covered, because men who are not your relatives are not supposed to look at your face.
Right, sure.
Now, in these small villages, everyone's frankly sort of related to each other.
Right.
So that is not an issue. But of course, the social workers who come in to manage these loans are often outsiders, not always, and yet they're able to help with the loans. It's really interesting.
The soap-making industrial project began in 1995. 8 women work at each soap factory. The soap mix is heated in a large container, where the workers scoop out portions of soap into oil bowls for cooling. Once cooled, these portions are formed into balls. These workers will produce over 15,000 pieces of soap each month. This factory earns about 5,000 taka per month, or roughly $71 US.
This is so hot that if they were to put it on their hands, it would be
You'd get burned.
Well, it burned beyond, it would be really, but nobody has. I looked and looked and looked at these women, and they are so talented. There are not residual burn marks on almost anyone's
That's
hands.
amazing. This is skilled labor.
Very.
However you want to describe it, it's skilled labor. It's amazing what they do.
These women are brilliant, brilliant.
And of course, they sell the soap.
They do. And the soap, by the way, just to say, is the soap is used to rub on fabric. So that you'll wet your clothes and you'll rub the soap onto
Yes.
that, and then you wet that again, and that's used to clean the fabric.
Okay.
So it's not a household soap like you and I would use.
When microlending first started, everyone was afraid
Right.
that the men would complain because their wives were working. But it turns out because they bring in money,
Yeah.
because they improve the housing and the food and help the children and actually provide clothes and even money for beer,
Yeah.
the men now are used to this. But what it's done is improve the status of women.
Right.
People respect these women as individual, important human beings.
Yes.
And that is absolutely critical. So these women are supposed to only deal with their relatives. They're not supposed to deal with men from the outside, although in the small villages they do because they need money and they need help. Being the money earner in the family has given them much more respect from their husbands and from other villagers. In addition, they are able now to send their daughters as well as their sons to school, which is their aim, of course, to educate their children. And they're able to provide, when there's a health clinic, health care for both girls and boys. And the other really challenging, amazing thing is under the Muslim traditions in Bangladesh, when your daughter gets married, you're supposed to pay a dowry. According to all the microlending organizations, Grameen, BRAC, PSDI, and others, one of the rules for lending you money is that you will not pay a dowry. Now this we thought would cause a terrible ruckus, but actually it hasn't. Because these women are earning money and they can provide, they've been able not to pay dowries for their daughters, and that has been an enormous social change in these communities.
And it's a strange thing for us to come into someone else's culture and just to, we bring so much judgment in our standards and our life, and it's a little bit disconcerting because we are judging a lot of folks when in fact their system has worked for thousands of years, and it's changing, and it seems to be changing for the better.
But we have to say that PSDI, although it's an American-based NGO,
Yes.
hires only Bangladeshis.
Yes.
And all of the other major microlenders, Grameen and BRAC and the others,
Yeah.
work only with Bangladeshis. So the idea of reducing the dowries, that was their idea. That wasn't a bunch of Americans coming in and shaking their fist, you shouldn't have dowries. It wasn't Americans saying you shouldn't respect Purdah. This is all done within the culture itself, and I think that's a very important thing to remember.
Yeah.
In 1997, PSDI partnered with small nurseries to work on a tissue culture project. They began researching and developing bananas, white potatoes, and sweet potatoes at their facility in Dhaka. After several small expansions, PSDI opened a state-of-the-art tissue culture laboratory in 2005 with the financial assistance from the Belgian government and the European Commission. The project's scientists aim to make a high-yield, disease-free crop for small cultivators, large-scale farmers, and the rural poor. In 2010, the facility produced 30,000 potato saplings, and these saplings can be used in turn to create more saplings and more potato seed. This project also seeks to address one of the country's other great needs, malnutrition. Sweet potatoes, the program's primary focus and a very popular food source in Bangladesh, are rich in many vitamins and minerals absent in much of the population's diet. The social businesses are businesses
Right.
run either nonprofit or for-profit with the aim to improve the social well-being of some people or other. But the micro-lending itself, when I take a microloan, is to improve my well-being.
Yes.
And I don't think about, it isn't that I'm selfish, I don't always think about other people.
But it's not charity.
It's not charity. It's not charity. No, it's run just like it's run just like General Motors
Right,
in
right.
order to make money. But the shareholder is me.
Mm.
The cottage industry, the quote, shareholders are the families running the cottage industry.
Yeah, I think that's what I always get tripped up on, because it seems to be a charity of some strange.
It's not a
kind.
charity.
And as
And a
you,
social business is not a charity either. It's
Right.
just that the aims of the social business are not the financial benefit of the shareholders.
Right.
They are for some other social good.
I make fun of you all the time because you sort of look and say this is a business.
Yes.
Don't mistake it for anything except a business.
That's what it is.
Because you particularly have a difference between charity or philanthropy. I can't imagine someone using the word philanthropy around you, and then a social business.
Philanthropy obviously is charity. It's giving things, it's giving away money or goods or services or healthcare.
Sure.
Social business is a business whose goal is to do some social good. It's a business, usually for-profit business,
Yes.
but its goal is to create social good rather than financial returns for its shareholders. Now, microlending and cottage industries are not philanthropy. These are loans given to people so that they can improve their economic well-being. But they run just like an ordinary business. They're like a micro General Motors, if you like, because their goal is to make as much money as possible, which isn't very much, I agree, for their families and their groups.
Right.
Now, what's interesting about PSDI is that it is both charity and a lender, because it gives away food and a roof for people who are too poor to get a microloan. It also helps with small schools, as we've seen, establish small schools in villages for grades 1 to 3. And then it gets started with families who at least have 2 meals a day and a roof. Then it gets started them on loans. So it moves from philanthropy to loans. So it is both a philanthropic organization and a lender.
But you don't mind starting off a business if it starts off as a philanthropic effort and then moves
I don't
from there.
mind. No, there's many uses for philanthropy.
This chalk factory employs 10 people throughout the year. The chalk is cured over intense heat, shaped into thin pieces, and then dried and boxed. Later, it will be sold to Chinese schools. Chanachur is a snack popular all over Bangladesh. It's made from a blend of peanut, wheat, bishon, chura, and salt. The mix is then pushed through a grate to create strings that are fried in a peanut oil. It's a savory, crunchy snack and sold everywhere. PSDI purchases ingredients from the local markets for the development partners to use in nearby factory kitchens. These kitchens produce about 2,000 kilos of the snack each month, which they sell for 65 taka per bag.
My grandmother used to make sort of a noodle dish on the tables at her house, and she would roll it out and then fry it and season it with chili seasonings. It was really good. And that's sort of what they make here on a bigger basis.
Bigger basis, yes.
Really, they're very efficient. I mean, unbelievably efficient at what they do.
Poverty is often thought of to be inevitable. It's thought as a lack of money or food or shelter, or sometimes people are even mean-spirited enough to argue that the poor deserve it because they don't work hard. But we've seen just the opposite in Bangladesh. Poverty is a system that holds capable and spirited people back from becoming independent and entrepreneurial. With the right tools, the world's poor can build themselves out of poverty.
Are cottage industries and microlending enough?
And the answer is yes and no. What microlending and cottage industries do is bring people out of abject poverty. The people who are helped are still, by our standards, poor. They may have their whole lives with a dirt floor. They are lucky if they get a bicycle. The very rich will have a motorcycle. They will not travel except maybe to one or two other villages. They will live their lives in these small villages. They might, when they get really, really rich, they might have one television in the village. We see that now in India. But they will never be what you call middle class. And the argument is that you need industrialization to create a wide middle class of people. Now that may be true, but in Bangladesh we have industrialization, but there's 90% of those are sweatshops which pay under minimum wage, and that does not reduce poverty at all, except for the owners, of course. And that there are not very many owners, so you can work that out. So it does not change. The numbers that have changed, the poverty reduction numbers in Bangladesh, 90% are because of microlending and cottage industries. With the right tools, the world's poor can work themselves out of poverty. PSDI's model for Bangladesh can be and has been replicated in other parts of the world. Beginning with the very poorest of the poor, those who can't even imagine taking out a microloan, PSDI has shown that with a little startup funding, families can move to economic independence through microlending, savings, and cottage industries. This model has been used all over South America,
Yes.
many parts of Africa, other parts of Asia, obviously. And interestingly, it's been used in the United States. The Grameen Foundation now lends, their microloans are between $1,500 and $2,500 to people starting small businesses, and they have 98% return on their loans. They've really helped people become little entrepreneurs and make decent livings for themselves. So this model, this same model can work other places, and it can work to reduce poverty in the United States as well.